Hello everyone, it's lovely to be back here again with you. My name's Rachel, and when I met you before I was telling you about my visit to Zambia. Now today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the village of Chipungo. I expect you remember that Chipungo is a very long way away from anywhere. It's in the middle of nowhere. It was a bumpy car journey to get there. So living somewhere that's such a long way from anywhere else makes life very different. We're going to see some more of the ways that life in Chipungo village in Zambia is different. So, do you remember the people we met there? Here's Miriam and her children and her grandson Cedric. You can see Cedric there. He's sitting on the hip of his auntie. They're standing in front of Miriam's house with its tin roof. And here's Timothy standing by the beautiful hen house that he made on his farm. Do you remember Timothy with his Liverpool shirt? And here are his friends and family sitting outside his house under the tree on the mat, and behind them his bicycle and his ox cart. Very proud of those, because nobody in the village, or hardly anyone, has a car. That makes it difficult to get to the city. So any way of getting about is useful. First of all then, the houses in Chipungo. We've seen this one before, and I think you can remember we said that most things happen outside because the houses themselves are very small. Things like cooking happen outside. This is Miriam's daughter. She's making the breakfast, I think, cooking in a copper pan over a fire that's a piece of wood burning between two bricks. Do you see how Miriam's house has beautiful decorations on the wall? Most houses in the village are made from materials that you can find easily nearby, like wood. You can see plenty of wood there. And the bricks are made from clay. They're homemade bricks, and the soil is very good for making bricks. And then the grey colour, the plaster on the walls, comes from another sort of clay, another sort of soil, there's plenty of it, that makes a good surface when you mix it with water. And you can get different colours as well. And the roof, of course, is thatch, and that comes from reed or other big plants that grow nearby. So they use what they've got. The more modern houses, like part of Miriam's house, have roofs of tin. Another thing that has to happen outside, washing up. This is Miriam's older daughter, and she's doing one of her jobs that she does every day. You can see all the pots and pans up against the wall. She was very proud to show off her skills at carrying things on her head. I noticed her carrying this great big bowl of vegetables around on her head, and I said, "Can you do it without holding?" And she said, "Yes, I can do it without holding." And so she demonstrated, and I wondered how many of us could carry something big like that on our heads. Now there's no electricity in the village. This means there's nothing you can switch on. You can't think of all the things you just switch on and off with a switch at home. So there's no light switches. This photograph of Timothy and his family I took in the evening after we'd had our meal together, and it was very, very dark in the room. I had to use flash, which is why we can see the people smiling away. But they only had one lamp. I think it was an oil lamp in the room, and gradually as evening wore on, it got darker and darker. So we were quite glad to go to bed when it got really dark. So as well as no electricity in the village, there's no running water. Just think about it. We can turn on a tap whenever we want to have some water, to boil a kettle and have a drink, or we can have a shower or a bath, or do the washing in the washing machine or the dishwasher, flush the toilet, all those things that we use water. But here you have to fetch the water that you want to use from a well like this one. And so the ladies here do this often, and the children too, fetching the water in a plastic bucket there, taking it home. And that means you don't waste a drop of water. You're much more careful how you use water. Maybe we should be more like that. Most people in the village keep animals they keep them for food, because they have to grow and keep their own food. So I spotted lots of animals wandering around in the village. So there's a mother hen with her chickens just trotting around the village. And you can see having a nice doze in the shade. So lots of goats. They seem to be quite tame. They just wander around. They know where they live. Goats, like sheep, can be useful for milk and eventually for meat. And here's a duck. And behind the duck is a beautiful little duck house to keep the duck safe at night. And you'll never believe, yes, I'm sure you've guessed, it was made by Timothy. That's Timothy's duck. Goats, here's another goat, and if you look carefully you can just see there's a baby goat, a kid, peeping out from the other side of its mother. Again, they're keeping nice and cool in the shade, and there's a very fluffy hen there in the front too. And there is a goat house. It's, of course, Timothy's goat house. You can see how it's been made with those homemade bricks and a thatch roof and lots of wood. So a special place for the goats to go and keep safe and cool in the hot weather and warm at night. Miriam has a few cows, and if you look at those cows, they're not quite the same as English cows. They have a sort of hump on their shoulders, and they have very big wide horns. Now, of course, you can get milk and meat from cows, but they have other uses as well. For example, they're used for pulling along those carts that we noticed. Those two boys, when they saw I was taking a photograph, they made the cows go really fast just to show off how quickly they could go in their carts. They were great fun. I thought it was wonderful to have an audience. I didn't notice any baby buggies or pushchairs or prams or anything, because the ladies in Zambia, the mums and the grannies, carry their children on their backs, just using a piece of cloth. And you can see there's Miriam, and she's just showing me how she ties her grandson onto her back with a cloth so that he's nice and comfy. Now Cedric's quite a big boy. He's about 5, I think. But on that day he wasn't very well, which is why Miriam's carrying him. Miriam wanted to show me her farm. Most of the people in the village have a plot of land. As well as keeping animals, they grow crops as well to eat and sometimes to sell. And I was interested to see Miriam's fields that she was very proud of. It was a long walk through all that long grass. There's Miriam with Cedric on her back, through a lot of puddles and little brooks and streams. Miriam took this photograph of me because if you look, I'm carefully making my way over a very wobbly bridge so that I don't fall into this pond. And Miriam thought, I wonder if Rachel is going to be able to get across here without falling in. And she took a photograph just in case I fell in, which I didn't. But there we are. She wanted a record of it. The first thing I saw growing on Miriam's farm in her fields were these. These are pumpkins. They're a bit like marrows and have lots and lots of big green leaves, which are useful for food as well, a bit like eating cabbage or spinach. There's the pumpkin growing. By the time I was there, they weren't green like this because they'd finished growing and they were lying in the fields ready to be collected and taken back to market or taken for Miriam to cook with herself. There were lots of them lying around in the field, looking rather like footballs that had been left behind. Miriam was very proud of her field of sunflowers. I think it might be the first year she'd grown sunflowers on her farm. She said usually they should be a bit taller than that. There hadn't been much rain that year. So the sunflower seeds are collected and they're given to animals and chickens and other birds for food. They're very nutritious, and you can make oil from the seeds as well. And here's one of Miriam's friends who was also busy in her field. She was pulling something out of the ground, some crops, something that she'd grown. Now if you look very carefully, I wonder if you can work out what she's growing. Have a look. It's something that we don't grow, but we eat over here. I'm going to give you a clue. Here's my clue. There we go. If you can see what these are. Okay. If I break it, take the shell off, crunch, crunch. Here I have a peanut. I bought these at the shop. In the shop they're called the monkey nuts, but I think we usually know them as peanuts. But they're also called ground nuts because, as you've just seen, they grow in the ground and you pull them up like potatoes. So in Zambia they do eat the nuts as nuts on their own, but also they grind them up into flour, which they use in cooking, and they make something that we like too, which is peanut butter. So peanuts are used a lot in Zambian cooking. And another thing that's used and grown a lot are beans. Lots of different sorts of beans. Here's a picture of the market in the town in Chipungo, and people have brought beans to sell, all sorts of beans. Some of them are to eat, to cook with, some of them are to use for animal food. And there's a little pot of tomatoes for sale as well there. Tomatoes are another crop that are used a lot. But the main thing that Zambian people grow a lot of is this. Look carefully, you might be able to work out what you can see growing there. It's what we call sweet corn. Only there they know it as maize. Now when I was there, the maize harvest had already happened. They'd already picked the maize, the corn cobs, and they were busy chopping down. These are Miriam's, her son and her nephew, and they're busy chopping down the old maize plants. They asked me if I wanted to have a go. That's the big knife thing or machete that they use. Well, I had a go several times. I just about managed to knock the plant over, as you can see. But I didn't manage to chop it properly. I had to give the knife back, and they thought that was quite funny. So here's Miriam again in her field, and that's a pile of old maize plants that I think they might have other uses for that, in building materials perhaps, or roofing for the little animal huts. But this is Miriam's collection, her store of maize that she grew, and it's in a special house, a special room in her house. Now that's going to last her all year until the next harvest, and it wasn't a very good harvest this year. There wasn't enough rain at the right time for the maize to grow really well. You can also see some sacks of maize flour in the background that she's had to buy. So here's some sweet corn or some maize, and you can see sometimes it's the seeds are just left to dry. Sometimes the seeds are ground up to make a coarse sort of flour, and sometimes they're ground even more to make a fine flour. And that's really important in Zambia because that's used to make something called nshima. Nshima. Everybody eats. Or here's a picture of two ladies bringing their maize flour home. They had to get that from somewhere else because they hadn't managed to grow enough on their farm that year because of the bad weather. Just think, carrying those sacks on your head like that. Anyway, here is a lady making nshima with the maize flour, and everybody eats nshima all the time, at pretty much every meal time in Zambia and much other parts of Africa. So she's put the flour into the pot, she's put some water there, and she's cooking and stirring and cooking and stirring and cooking and stirring for a long time with a great big wooden stirring stick. She does it for ages until it's ready, and when it's ready it looks a bit like mashed potato. And then what do? Well, you take a dollop of the nshima in your hand and you squidge it up, and instead of feeling like mashed potato it starts to feel more like Play-Doh. So you've got it in your hand and you can make a shape out of it, and you make a shape that's a bit like a scoop, and then you can use it, your nshima scoop, to scoop up the stew or the vegetables or whatever else you might be eating, and then you can eat the scoop. So nshima is not only it's a food, but it's like edible cutlery, and everybody uses it. I had some. You get the hang of it quite quickly. And so here are some people in Zambia eating their food, and they've all got great dollops of nshima with the rest of their food, and they're using the nshima to eat the rest of their food, and then they're eating the nshima. So I wonder, well, here's something you have to do. Before you eat, it's very important to wash your hands. I'm sure you all do that. But if you've been eating that way, you have to wash your hands afterwards as well. And here are two school children, and they're using a very, very nice water station. It's even more important these days, because of coronavirus everywhere, to wash your hands a lot. So just like you have to keep your hands clean, so do the children in Zambia. So finally, I thought it would be fun to have a look at some plates of food, and we'll see if we can work out what the things are on the food. Well, the nshima, there it is, blobs of nshima just everywhere on on 3 of the plates, not on 4 of them, on 3 of them. And you can see some greens. Well, I think that might be chopped up pumpkin leaves, perhaps, cooked, very healthy. And here, some beans, a mixture of beans, and they've been cooked in a sauce with onions and tomatoes. Over here we've got something else called ifisashi, and I had that and I thought it was really delicious. So it's a mixture of onions and tomatoes and spinach and peanut flour, and here they've got some peanuts on top as well. It's really tasty. And here's something that might be more of a Sunday lunch, a special meal, because there's some meat there. Looks a bit overcooked, but they like to have their pieces of meat cooked a lot. So there's some more fisashi. That might be made with a different sort of leaf, but it's the same idea. There's the nshima, there's the meat, and there's a sort of sauce to go with it, tomatoes and onions and other things. Very tasty. Now here's something though on the bottom right hand side that I have to tell you I didn't taste for myself. I just couldn't quite bring myself to do it, but it's a real treat. And the other lady I was staying with, Monica, told me that was her absolute favourite snack, and it's fried caterpillars. Well, that's something that I'd have to get used to a bit before I had it, but it's a very good thing to eat that sort of thing, because it's a good source of protein, and there's plenty of those caterpillars grown and farmed out in Zambia. Well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed a little bit more about life in Chipungo village. It's all changing all the time, of course. Eventually they'll get electricity, and eventually they'll get running water, and then things will change quite a bit. So it's been very nice to be with you again. I hope to see you again. I hope you have a good holiday, and muy bueno.